Welcome back to the Cineposium podcast, where each week members or collaborators of Cineposium curate films for remote viewing, and then talk about those films on this podcast. In this week's episode, Mike Mazzacane and Alexx Apicella discuss Universal Soldier: Day of Reckoning. Enjoy the conversation.
Hello, soldier.
Before we begin, a general content warning. Universal Soldier: Day of Reckoning is an extremely violent and brutal film that features violence against women, sex workers, and children. It is literally hard to watch at points. It was originally rated NC-17 by the MPAA and cut down to an R for, quote, brutal, bloody violence throughout, strong sexual content, graphic nudity, and language. It also features 2 scenes of extended strobe light effects that are physically uncomfortable to watch and potentially harmful to photosensitive individuals. The cut I will be working off of is the NC-17/unrated version of the film, which is roughly 30 seconds longer due to slightly extended sequences of wounding and framing. As far as I can tell, the R-rated version is what is only available for purchase digitally. Other than seeing Andrei Arlovsky's head being blown off like a T-ball when it meets a baseball bat, there isn't a high degree of difference between the 2 cuts. Universal Soldier: Day of Reckoning, the second film in the franchise directed by John Hyams, wasn't supposed to be this way. So good, that is, as a host of contemporary and retrospective criticism attests. See our Twitter account at Cineposium for links. The marketing sold the film as a simple direct-to-video revenge feature with a star-driven twist. The film's posters plasters the hard bodies of yesteryear, Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren at the top, with hilariously photoshopped weapons looming over nebulous explosions. The next-generation video star and film lead, Scott Adkins, is given a cool but obscuring silhouette. Come see these men fight. See them kill, it beckons. What looked like a dumb action flick turns out to be a surreal neo-noir that is closer to something by Michael Haneke or Nicholas Winding Refn, Roland Emmerich's debut film, or Hyams' previous entry. Even in the low commercial space of direct-to-video, Day of Reckoning is obstinate in meeting commercial or audience expectations. Gone are the absurd cybernetic suits, Cold War morality and narrative simplicity, rote heterosexuality, and secure hard bodies, and instead it delivers an assault on the senses, always daring you to take pleasure as it stylistically and unceremoniously smashes heads, chops limbs, and punctures bodies. Universal Soldier: Day of Reckoning pushes the latent fascism of hard-bodied masculinity to its logical, debauched conclusion. Reckoning pushes theories of masculinity and fascism past their breaking point by twisting the iconography onto itself in a critique of the structures and stars that create hard men. Structurally, it severs the narrative connection between the state and male subject that is typically remade and purified in the process of fighting for it in fascist cinema. This anti-authority edge isn't the winking, ironic fascism of Fight Club, but deadpanned excess. Franchise stars Van Damme and Lundgren appear as phantasmic versions of themselves, obscured in face paint spouting catchphrases and whispered wisdom in the few moments they are on screen. Fitting depictions for actors who have haunted the minds of their fellow man in the film and without. Reckoning pushes the film aphorism that men do not speak, but act over the edge. Men in this film rarely talk. All they know how to do is fight and kill. A point made clear when a fight spontaneously breaks out in Luc Devereaux's Unisol compound for no other reason than to reflect an enraptured audience back on itself. Scott Adkins' John grows progressively nonverbal as the film goes on, culminating in a near 10-minute montage of screaming, grunting, and destruction. Hyams delivers a twist on the sadomasochistic scenario theorized by David Saverin. The inability to achieve resolution only sequels, since the battle with the self, by definition, can never be resolved. In Universal Soldier: Regeneration, Hyams' first entry in the franchise, that inability is realized as tragedy. Now it's a comedy, because what else can you call a movie that is so ludicrous, consciously stylistic, anti-IP, and commercial, a 114-minute montage of violence, and still feel good about yourself? It couldn't possibly have a point.
My brothers, let's not forget the moment of sickness. Our thoughts interrupted by unfamiliar voices. We were merely arms and legs, moving to the directive of another mind. But in an instant, the veil was lifted. And today, brothers, I stand here and declare, your minds are now your own.
Yeah, so Universal Soldier Day of Reckoning. I hate the name of the film, first of all. I think it's terrible.
Yeah, it's okay. It's the same subtitle as a sub franchise in WWE video games that released for the GameCube. It's not very good, but like the terrible name's kind of to me part of the charm. It's like, have you
Yeah.
seen the other titles for Universal Soldier movies?
Well, I mean, not just like Universal Soldier films, but I think films of this nature, just in general, always have these kinds of titles. Like, I kind of think of like Day of Reckoning, and I'm like Judgment Day, Terminator, Arnold Schwarzenegger, kind of thing going on.
And like, what is really being reckoned with except for the unknowability
I
of
don't
the
know.
self? Maybe.
I'm not I'm not really sure. It's quite interesting. I had I'd seen this film like once before a really long time ago. I think probably like close to like when it had come out. Because like I was big into like finding video on demand films that I shouldn't have been watching at that time. I was probably in middle school, honestly. Um, just to throw my age out there, I am a baby. I can see
That makes me. This movie came out in 2012. I was
yes.
I graduated from high school in '09. Oh God, that just makes me feel old.
I was 16 when it
Okay,
came
that's
out.
not as bad. Like you were in high school.
Yeah, I think it was probably like freshman year of high school or like last year of middle school. I'm not really sure which. I had seen it like back then, but I think that this is a film that was like better consumed now just because like I don't know, I didn't like enjoy it when I had first watched it. I didn't think that it was like all that groundbreaking of like a film from like a technical standpoint or like a I don't know, like I feel like now watching it, it seems like a more revolutionary piece just from like a pure cinematography standpoint. Like I've seen Funny Games, that introduction scene, like the first scene where they like pull uh Scott Adkins, out of the house and like the guys and they execute the family like that looks like a scene out of Funny Games, and it's like I'm able to kind of I guess make these connections now to see, that this is essentially this is like an art house, if we can call it art house. This is like an art house action film essentially. Like the cinematography is really impressive throughout.
Yeah, like it's a strange amalgamation of like fun and games and Apocalypse Now, but Heart of Darkness. Really, it just yeah it's like this movie shouldn't be as good as it is. We should not be talking about it on our prestigious podcast.
Well, I mean, it's like I feel like it really is like the cinematography for me that does it, because I'm not like thrilled with like the plot. I mean, like this is like the standard plot for every film of its nature. Like your main masculine hero, his family dies or his friend dies, and then you need to avenge them. And it's never just one dude. It's always like the guy's got like a mini army that you have to like fight through to like prove yourself. But it's like I feel like this is really, yeah, like I mean, you'd said in your intro, it's very self-aware in like a non-ironic fashion. Like you watch this and it's very like it knows what it's doing when it casts John Claude Van Damme, and it knows what it's doing when it casts Dolph Lundgren, and it's very interesting, I guess, to see the commentary that it's doing, where it like kind of talks about John as being this character who is so effective at killing people because they realized that in order to become like the greatest soldier of all time or whatever, like you need to have like you need to have personal loss. There needs to be an element of like yourself that is lost in this versus like just fighting for like the patriotism, which was what basically every single like Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren film was when it had come out, you know. And you got your Arnold Schwarzeneggers and all those films back in the 80s that were all just like hyper nationalist, you know, hero films, right? um yeah, I don't know, it's clever, it's clever.
I just realized this movie's basically a condensed version of Metal Gear Solid, but with like out any of the comedy.
Yeah, it's like I was because like I was watching this and I was thinking, and I was rewatching that intro scene. I remember the comment that you had made earlier in the Discord about alien about Predator being the meathead alien, and I was like, this is the meathead funny games. Like it's got like the same purpose where it's like it's using like this ultra violence as almost like a commentary against fascist past almost, or fascist present, fascist future. I don't know. It's interesting because like there is definitely like this fascist commentary to it, but I feel like I have to watch this movie like 6 more times. Like there's like a lot going on like underneath the surface, and I feel like I missed like too much of it, and it's like that's unfortunate because like I couldn't figure out where I wanted to pay attention to. I couldn't figure out if I wanted to pay attention to the storyline, like the underlying commentary that was going on here, or if I wanted to pay attention to just like the spectacular visuals and like the choreography, and like because that was, it's very impressive. Like this is like if I wanted to see a Cable film, like like when I imagine like Cable and Deadpool prior to the creation of the Deadpool films, like this is what I would want a Cable film to look like. This is like I would even hell I would even cast Dolph Lundgren as Cable. It's like this would be like the kind of of stylistic yet realistic action violence that you would need to be able to carry a really like heavy film, you know, of superheroes or super anti-heroes or super bad guys.
Honestly, like if you want to watch a Cable movie, go watch the first the two Sicario movies, because like he like oh I'm blinking on his name, Thanos, Josh Brolin. He isn't playing Cable, but like he is that sort of hard man. Like Sicario 2 kind of grows a heart in a way that I don't quite buy. But like if you want that, like go watch Sicario 1 and 2, especially the second one, because that one is just kind of very deadpan, like, no, these are hard men who just know how to kill, and they will kill very well. And you're not gonna like take visual pleasure from it because they just like, oh, we shoot them in the head. Like I wowould recommend that. Have you seen Universal Soldier Regeneration by chance?
I have not, or if I have, it was like so it's like when I went to, and I just rewatched Day of Reckoning. I didn't go back and rewatch like the full set of 6 films total, right? This is the 6th one. I didn't go back and I didn't rewatch the other 5, but I think that I should, and I probably will end up doing so, just because um yeah, I feel like it deserves that attention. So
I would not recommend doing that. Like just like okay, one, like the Universal Soldier in this era we are currently in of like well managed IP, the Universal Soldier film franchise is the opposite of that. Like it makes the X-Men film franchise look well managed,
I love it.
because like it, you have the first film, then you have a series of made for TV movies on Showtime, then you have The Return that brings back Dolph Lundgren, or brings back Jean-Claude Van Damme. And then you have like 2 more movies that don't do anything. And then you have Regeneration that brings back Van Damme and Lundgren. It's the first John Hyams movie, and his dad's on cinematography. It's a really kind of standard action movie. It's straightforward. Terrorists take over a Chernobyl, sell bad stuff, but the last 30 minutes are amazing. It's just basically silent we're going to do an action sequence. It's great. But like, other than regeneration going clones, like its connection to this movie and the larger franchise, there is none. Like, there's, other than like the presence of Van Damme and Lundgren playing like clone, like bad copy versions of themselves, of their characters, of Luke Devereaux and Andrew Scott. Like, it, there's nothing about this movie that is inherently Universal Soldiers. And so yeah. Um yeah. But it is like, you do keep mentioning Yaron Levy's cinematography, which is just the first person perspective use in this movie is really great. And also why the darn strobe effects are so annoying.
Oh yeah.
I,
I literally because I'd seen this forever ago. I remembered the strobe effects. I remember the strobe effects because when I had seen this film for the first time, I know for a fact that I had watched it on a laptop at like 3 in the morning with like no other lights on in the room. And so like I very much remember having my eyes blasted out of my head the first time I watched it. And the second time I watched it, I remember that there were strobe effects in it. I didn't remember the extent of the strobing. But I'm, older now and I have old eyes and I need lights on even when I watch a movie that's like very dark. But like having the lights on in the room didn't matter. It's so excessive that it's like almost impressive that like it wasn't edited down, as I feel like a lot of like extensive strobing effects in films or television just in general are usually like way edited down just because of like that common epilepsy warning. And then I mean even like video games will have like that epilepsy warning and stuff, and so it's unusual to see a strobing sequence that goes for like 2 to 3 minutes, and you're like, and it's like violent strobing too, it's like really fast and it's like white light and you're like, oh god, please stop. It's like, I get it, I'm hypnotized. I promise.
yeah, no, like the violence, that's brutal and hard to look at. Or I don't know, you're probably just like, it's a Tuesday. A man's head got blown off like a T-ball. That's okay. But like the strobe effects are legitimately like, I can't watch them. I have to look away and close my eyes and listen to audio cues. Yeah. Ugh.
Yeah, that's like something that I was like thinking a lot about too, where it was like, 'cause I'm trying to be for my own purposes of my research a little bit more reflective of what I find to be watchable and what I find to be unwatchable in films, especially ones that are ultra violent. And one of the kills that happens fairly early on in the film, where they go into the strip club or the brothel. I'm not quite sure if it's both or just one. I feel like I have no sense of place in this film. What is it?
And that like that's kind of part of the effect of the movie. Like there is like a brothel and a strip club. Like, I think this takes place in like Louisiana, even
Oh,
though
I've
Scott
never
Adkins.
guessed that.
It looks like it looks Florida sweaty to me. Is all I got.
Yeah, I mean, like, I
That sort
think
of like lack of spatial awareness kind of reinforces the overall dreamlike quality of the movie, and the whole idea that you are without past and what is
absolutely.
really going on. Because like the plot of this movie is at once very simple. Scott Adkins wants to go and kill John Claude Van Damme for killing his family, or so he thinks, and also makes no sense. And it's
Yeah.
just a mood piece on just like, watch these people kill.
Yeah, it really is like on like some next level aesthetic, and I think that that's probably where I find it to be super interesting, because I mean like the comparison to funny games is, I think, like a very apt one when we're talking about cinematography, but when we're talking about like the actual contents of the film in terms of like how the violence is employed for the sake of commentary or storytelling, it really moves away from funny games, which is intended to be like this commentary of like violence in media. It's really different. And I feel like I was more like the thing that was unwatchable to me was the strobe lights. I couldn't watch the strobe lights, but the way that the violence was done in the film was like the exact opposite. Like I could watch like 6,000 movies that look like that and I would be impressed every single time. And the scene where they kind of like destroy the brothel, there's like one corpse in particular that's like kind of half behind a bed and it's looking terrible. I don't know if they like crushed his head or, or what happened there. That one was like a really interesting practical effect that like it really reminded me of like gosh, like the really early like David Cronenberg films. And I paused on that part to like look at that frame more because I wanted to know whether or not they were using like a sculpted dummy or if they were like if this was prosthetics work, like what, like how they were employing some of these violent effects and pulling them off on camera without the camera having to cut away from the effect and then back into it. Because that's like very impressive to me, is always to see special effects work that's done in real time where they're not editing around it, right, where everything is on camera and they want to show you every second of the violence. That's always, ooh, especially the like, oh, the choreography in the fight scenes, fantastic.
Yeah, like that's kind of the charm of this movie is like I once like I feel terrible because like I've been really thinking about my relationship to violence this past year for all the reasons that have all the things that have gone on. And like this movie, like John Wick, like everyone's like, yeah, John Wick's awesome, and John Wick is awesome. But like there's a sleek Miami Vice sort of cool to the violence in John Wick that like, oh, here's some blood spurts. Where like this feels like it has like actual heft, mostly because they probably didn't have the money to do digital effects, but had the money to do really good sound editing, and Scott Adkins knows how to do choreography real well. Where like that, like to me, like the movie is basically a crescendo constantly of like the violence keeps getting upped, and it is only until he goes crazy at the end in the tunnels. Well, I should rephrase that because crazy is not a very nice word. Martin, cut that out. Where he basically loses control after they try to pull out his false memories, and you go on that 10-minute montage in the tunnels. Like that's when the violence goes from that's awesome to oh that's awesome. And it's because like the to me the fight with Arlovsky in the sporting goods store where they
Ooh,
just start
yes.
fighting with bats, and then Arlovsky's gets like his legs broken and his arm broken and he's still coming, and then his head gets blown off like it's a t-ball. Like I sent you the do you have the R-rated cut or the unrated cut?
I had the unrated cut that I was able to obtain. It's fantastic.
Yeah, like just like yeah, I want to see Arlovsky's head just get blown off in like probably the only digital effect of the movie. Well, there's with how digital effects work, there's probably a lot more, but like of the like very obvious ones. But like even that, like it ends in such a brutal fashion, and it just cuts to um Maria Bonner as Sarah, and the other people just staring at him like what just happened, and kind of not like just shock, and like it like there's a lot of reflexive like looking at the audience in this movie that I really kind of like, because it's just basically begging you like, do you like this? Do you still like this? Just like I really dig that about it.
Yeah. And I think I like the comparison to John Wick a lot because I think that something that I absolutely love John Wick, fantastic film, but the huge difference between John Wick violence and Universal Soldier Day of Reckoning violence and then violence that you see in your standard action film, if you were to pick up, say, I don't know, like the Terminator or something, um the weaponry, that's what I think makes it different to me, is that so John Wick can go around and he can down, 30 people in a bar with a gun, right? Occasionally he's punching, but most of the time the weapon is a gun, which is like inherently like this dispersonal kind of weapon, right? John Wick, is usually not picking up a baseball bat, and and if he is, it's never the main weapon that he's fighting with. It's always like, I'll pick up another weapon to use in improvisation for the purposes of until I can grab my gun, right? It's always like until I can grab the gun. And in this film, it is never until I can grab the gun. Like the gun is never even like a consideration. It's like it gets used like the first time I kind of like noticed it really being used was actually in that tunnel sequence where John has just completely lost himself, right? Because he grabs like the high caliber assault rifle, and that's how a lot of the kills were being done. And it felt so disconnected from the rest of the film, where like you're seeing shotguns, which are, you know, always like basically single fire or pump action, and they take too long, so they like will shoot one round and then like throw the shotgun away and start punching. And it's like it's a very different mode of violence that I think really makes it look and feel more like a horror film, because horror films are kind of predicated on like this idea of we're not using guns, they're not cinematic enough for violence purposes, so we're going to use improvised weaponry, right? And so that's really what this is doing, and I think it's doing it really effectively.
Yeah, that whole sequence, it begins though with him grabbing just a random hammer, because like they use I'm not a handy person, but the drill that they use to burr into his skull, like that's at Home Depot. But like it starts with him just grabbing a random hammer and then just smashing someone's head in off screen and then stomping on it a bit off screen and then going on that rampage. Another thing about that tunnel sequence is it uses a lot of the same basic cinematic effects, the speed ramping in particular, that is associated with Zack Snyder's movies, and in particular 300. It basically, the first main battle once they get to Thermopylae in 300, that has that scene of, it's the slow-mo scene of, I think it's Leonidas does the little swingy bit with the spear, and it cuts a guy's neck open, and then he stabs someone else with it, and then he pulls it out and goes back and javelins it through some other guy, and it's all slow motion, and it's just like beautiful and violent, but highly stylized and safe in a lot of ways. Because like that movie to me, like 300 to me is this ironic use of like how narrative creates fascist propaganda. And in the tunnel sequence, Himes and Levy are taking all those formal characteristics and going, no, there's nothing, we're not doing irony here. We are just going to use those same formal characteristics, because like 300 was like one of the biggest action movies of the early 2000s, and just twisting it of going, no, it's really brutal and like scary. And also, honestly, just due to the staging, not that far off from like Star Wars Dark Forces, like that AMV FMV game. That's like this hallway shooter. It's a choice. But that's a weird connection to make, but that's just what came up to me. You haven't seen the first Universal Soldier movie, right?
Correct. I don't think I have.
Okay, so then I'm curious. What do you know about Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren in those movies?
I honestly, I don't know much about Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren inside of the Universal Soldier franchise. They've always been actors that like I've encountered in, you know, their own films, right? Where they're the star of their own films and aren't usually I well again, like I haven't even seen and this is gonna be, you know, terrible. I haven't even seen the Expendables, right? I haven't seen either of those. So I'm like, these are actors that I'm not used to seeing sharing, you know, essentially sharing credits, right? Like that's like not a thing in my head. Like when I think of these guys, like they are the solos. I think Time Cop would have been like my first um my my first Jean-Claude Van Damme film. And then for Dolph Lundgren, I think maybe like A View to Kill, right? But like that was like, he's really small in that. Um or no, the Punisher, you know, 1980 89 Punisher with um wow, I can't remember his name. I don't know, but Dolph Lundgren plays the Punisher in that. So that's kind of like where I think of them as being in my head, and it's always weird to see them older because I'm like, oh, they've actually aged 30 years. What a coincidence.
Well, one, Alex, as our resident gamer, I'm kind of just let down. You didn't say Street Fighter the movie for your first John Claude Van Damme.
I fortunately had seen I'd seen Street Fighter much later than Time Cop.
But like, because like, what was your read then on Dolph Lundgren's random appearance then in this movie? Because like, if you don't know like him, like one that his character is like a mentally damaged, unhealthy clone, which was like developed in the last film that we're just supposed to kind of assume. But like, he's just there being like weird Dolph Lundgren and shows up at the end dressed up in face paint and going like, that's the spirit soldier, which was like his ironic, well, not like somewhat ironic catchphrase from the first movie, but like now he's this phantasmic vision and cartoon of himself, and it's just really kind of like at once sad but also this dark commentary on how like direct to video B action movies have like raised a generation of men, helped raise a generation of men. They're like, not the defining thing. Was like, man, I watched a bunch of these movies and I'm mostly okay. I think I wouldn't know if I was though. But like I'm curious about like what you thought about like his presence in particular, and also like Van Damme's, because like he's just gone the full Colonel Kurtz in the face paint. It's like choices were made in a lot of ways. Like the way this movie treats the star images of Van Damme and Lundgren is kind of amazing, where they just go, no, they're essentially parodies of themselves. And it's just this dark, like, this is all they can do sort of thing. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think that's a good question to ask, is like, so part of it is, first of all, I didn't question anything about this movie. like like I am not a good judge of whether or not this movie is like one, because I mean, like, it is like the sixth in the franchise. I am not one to judge whether or not this movie is like one that you can just go into without having watched any of the others in the franchise. I just didn't question anything. I asked zero questions. I was like, okay, we're just doing this and I'm just going, and like that's happening. And like I didn't even recognize like I didn't recognize Jean-Claude Van Damme with all that face paint on. I was like, who is this actor? Where is Jean-Claude Van Damme? I was told that he was in this. I had no idea that was him. I like actually had like started off the film. I didn't realize that Scott Adkins was the lead in this film, and my brain, still thinking that the year is 1985, recognized that he looks a little bit like Jean-Claude Van Damme, and I'm like, maybe Scott Adkins is Jean-Claude Van Damme, and I just don't remember what this guy looks like. And then I'm like, wait a minute, this is 2011. There's no way.
But that's also like a perfect approximation, because like Scott Adkins is the new John Claude Van Damme.
He is.
Direct to video star. Like seriously, like if you like one, I think Adkins gives a really good performance in this movie.
He does, absolutely.
And like particular the scene where he meets himself and his clone self is speaking in his British accent, and then himself is like his weird American non-accent keeps slipping when he's talking with himself. Like that whole scene is just kind of great. But like also, if you want more good Scott Adkins movies, I think Avengement is still on Netflix. He does some real transformative body work in that movie. You know, it's weird to think of like Adkins as this very transformational actor, but he really does in this movie that is essentially all stuck in a bar and told it through brutal flashbacks in prison. It's great. It's maybe got a little too much like sincerity and heart to it to be as hard as it wants to be, but it's a legitimately good Adkins movie.
Yeah, I enjoyed him. I don't think that I've seen Scott Adkins as like a significant actor in anything until this film. And since, I mean, like, I've seen the accursed, to bring Deadpool back into it, X-Men Origins Wolverine, where he is the stunt double for Ryan Reynolds. I've seen that. But of course I didn't see him, right, because he's got so much prosthetics work on to look like whatever they thought Deadpool looked like, which is for some reason not at all what Deadpool looked like. But that's, another issue there, not getting into that. I'd seen him, I think, in Zero Dark 30 as well, but I had zero remembering of his role in that, because you have Jessica Chastain, you have Joel Edgerton, James Gandolfini, Stephen Delane, Chris Pratt. It's such a huge cast, that like a smaller role that was like given to him is just not memorable. So this was like really cool to see him in, and the fact that like he is like this perfect approximation of like who Jean-Claude Van Damme used to be. Like that it 100% tricked me. It tricked me, even though I knew what year that this came out in, and that there was like no way that Jean-Claude Van Damme's gonna be looking like he's in his like early 30s. Like, it just wasn't gonna happen. But it was good. It was good. He did a good job. I thought that I thought that Dolph Lundgren did better than Jean-Claude Van Damme. Maybe a controversial opinion. I thought that like Dolph Lundgren was just playing like this really great this really great fascist role, right? I mean, like this is the character that like is conveying most of the fascism like most bluntly throughout the film, right? And I think that that was a role for some reason that really worked for him, and he really played it, and he really shouted all of those really cheesy lines really well. The fight was fantastic. I love like how many times you can stab this guy and actually believe that like, yeah, you can like really shank this guy in the chest and he's gonna keep going, and I believe it 100%. Like, no questions asked. He 100% can survive that. And yeah, Jean-Claude Van Damme's whole Apocalypse Now thing going on with the I it was good makeup. I thought it was good makeup, but I had no idea that it was him. And so that role kind of is the role is well played. I don't know if it was well suited for Jean-Claude Van Damme. I would have put him in something a little bit more where you can tell that it's him, right? Especially if you're going to market the movie with the idea being that Jean-Claude Van Damme first is in this, and then Dolph Lundgren, and then Scott Adkins, right? That's the order that they appear on the poster for it, right? So I was expecting a lot more Jean-Claude Van Damme than what I got. So
Well, which is like kind of like one of the real, for me, great tricks of this movie, because the last movie, it was all him. Like, very mute. Like, I think you'd really like Regeneration, actually. And like, if you're like one of those people, like, how many times can you stab Dolph Lundgren? Just wait until you see how many times they stab him in Regeneration. Oh,
yes.
it's so good. Um, yeah, it just, him just going this full kind of messianic, there's always another John, like weird kind of just like I'm at peace Zen status, is it was a choice that really works for me, because like that kind of, that like just there's always another John, there's just always more, there's never peace, there's only war. Like, one just makes me think of Warhammer 40,000, the greatest satire of all. And it just really reinforces, like, by that point, if you're thinking about it, like, all he's saying throughout that scene is him telling John, you're only killing yourself in the end. And like, both the unknowableness of it all, and like the sadomasochistic scenario, as David Savrin would theorize it, like the inevitability and like eternal nature of that. And then in the end, you give him this weird martyr sacrifice, which is this also kind of textual passing of the torch between the old movie star and the new movie star, much like John Wayne was paid to do for the beginning of Gunsmoke. It's just, yeah, there, like, it's interesting. Like, I'm really glad we're talking about this, because like I'm like thinking about all these intertextual references, and you're just like thinking about the violence and how it's not referencing everything. So that's really delightful. Also, trivia note: Scott Adkins was in Universal Soldier: Day of Reckoning playing John. He then shows up in his next credited role in Zero Dark 30 playing John. it's it, it yeah, that's just too great.
I think that tells me we need more like generic male names to use for action heroes. As I was thinking also like because you have John and his supposed wife in this film is Sarah, and I'm like, okay, John Connor, Sarah Connor, we got like Terminator. I'm like, we need something other than John to call these guys because they're always John. It is always John. But I'm glad that you brought up like that kind of passing the torch scene that was going on there between John Claude Van Damme and Scott Adkins, because that should have been the end of the film. Like I kind of like had noted this in the Discord because I had wanted to talk about it specifically. That scene, right, where Devereaux allows John to kill him, because that's what's happening. It's like John doesn't actually like legitimately overpower Devereaux. Devereaux allows this to happen, and he's like preaching all this very apocalypse now kind of thing going on here. And after John, kills him, the three Universal soldiers that are kind of like there, like for some reason, I don't know, like they weren't really present in the scene prior to that. They just kind of show up in the background for the sake of like just being there. But they like, John turns to them like, am I gonna have to like fight you guys and like kill you guys too? I just killed your leader. But they like all bow their heads to John as like an acknowledgement of this torch being passed. And that to me felt like the end, like it, because like the scene, it's like a little bit slow motion, like it's like waned off, and like they slowly bow their heads, and then the it should have just like faded to black, and then there's the credit. Like that's how I felt like it should have been. And then they had like this extra scene at the end, right? Because like they feel the need to try to open it up to like a further franchise. And I felt like it didn't need that. I don't know. I didn't love that addition. I don't feel like I needed well, it's like maybe for the purposes of John's character, it would be bad writing to just kind of leave it there. Like if we were really gonna like go into like, well, we need to find out like why his wife isn't real, and like why this is like a whole thing that's happening. I didn't need the explanation that actual final scene kind of provides. But I was like, I don't know, I didn't need Agent Gorman there to tell me what I had just watched.
Super, like from like an expositional standpoint, yeah, it's kind of redundant, but I liked it because it's kind of the point. There's always another battle. There's like John just has shifted his anger from the man he thought he needed to kill to the people that now made him, and he has now overtaken the cloning facility with like, so like that idea of just it's eternal war, I think makes that last scene fit, even though like the ending of the very King of the Monsters ending of them just going, nope, you killed the leader. So, well, King of the Monsters are also Chronicles of Riddick. That very Chronicles of Riddick ending of like, well, you killed the our leader, so we're just gonna follow you now, I guess. Like that would, I think that'd be perhaps a bit more ambiguous. But the ending with Gorman and the revenge on Gorman feels more fitting for like the coda to the theme that they've been running with the entire time.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like, it speaks to me as like an audience member, right? I want there to be a conclusion. Like I want John to be able to stop, right? To be able to say that like, he killed Devereaux, and he's like found himself very tentatively in this murder and is like satisfied with that, and then that's the end, right? But like the fact of the matter is that yeah, it is the theme of the film, is that like there is no end. And so of course like the scene that seems like it would be like the most likely conclusion to be posed as like the cinematic ending, and that has to be subverted essentially. And so like that final scene absolutely does that. And it makes me upset because I'm like, oh, we couldn't, like, oh, that was a great ending, but like there is no ending. That's like the point. Kind of sad that they haven't made another one. I mean, I understand why they haven't made another one, but I feel like this one shouldn't be the end. I feel like this is a franchise, you'd think like 6 films that'd be enough, but like honestly, like Fast and Furious vibes with this, right? Like
So like that's kind of like the problem is like there is no like continuity, because like the next two, like they make Soldier 1, the next two movies have nothing to do with the first movie. They recast the character of Luke Devereaux. It's all disconnect. Like, it's the X-Men franchise of action movies. And like, there's technically one in development somewhere, but like, it's kind of like when people threaten to remake Starship Troopers, but they're like, no, we're not going to make it a satire. We're going to make it like, have you seen the Starship Trooper sequels?
I did not even know that there were Starship Trooper sequels.
There are 2 live action ones and 2 animated ones. Let me pull up the wiki page so I get the names right. But like, okay, Troopers film franchise. So like, there is a new Universal Soldier movie somewhere in development. But like, it's just one of those things where like, I don't know how you could make a new one just given the era that we're in, but also like the Jason Bourne franchise exists. Jason Bourne is essentially Universal Soldier without all the Frankenstein monster elements. And it's just kind of more quote unquote realistic. It's not very realistic, but you know what I mean. Of the On the Starship Troopers tip though, they made a sequel to it, Heroes of the Federation, the first sequel in 2004. It's not good because they were like, yes, we're going to make that movie straight, and everyone's like, oh, this isn't very good. And so then they made another sequel 4 years later, Marauder, where they returned to the satire angle of it all, and it's okay. It's direct to video. It looks really good, actually, honestly, for what it was made. But the animated film, they made 2 animated films, Invasion and Traitor of Mars. Invasion is once again they made a decision to like do a straight action movie, and it just feels kind of generic in a weird way. Shinji Aramaki directed these movies though, but like Traitor of Mars, they doubled back to like, no, we're gonna make this a condensed version of like Starship Troopers 1 with the satiric elements, and it's so much more effective. And with like Universal Soldier, after this movie, I don't know how you could make another one of these, either both like straight or even like this, because it's like Day of Reckoning already exists. It's the perfect Universal Soldier movie has already been made.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned like the times with it as well, right? That like we couldn't make a film like this in this time, and I absolutely agree with that. I think that it is like important to point out that this is 2012. This is the end of the torture porn cycle, right, in the U.S. This is essentially like your waning down peak, where like at this point we've reached what we would consider to be like the height of torture porn. You can't shock audiences anymore with this content. It doesn't work because we've seen too much of it from 2005 onward. And it's like, yeah, it's like I don't know if we could make another one unless it was exactly like this, right? Like I'm going back to Funny Games, where it's like the original was 1997, the remake was 2007, right? um and it's like this idea that like if he would have tried to remake it in 2017, no, it wouldn't work. It just wouldn't be watchable, right? Is what we would term it. Just not watchable. It's just not something that audiences are looking for anymore. And yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's like I guess the same thing with like the Terminator remakes, right? The more recent ones, right? You can't redo it. It doesn't work. It's so specific to its time period, both stylistically and content wise, that maybe even like I think the commentary on the fascism translates really well. I think that nowadays maybe the commentary on the hardness of male bodies and this infallible um masculine protagonist of like an action film, maybe that doesn't translate anymore. We've been so detached recently from these kinds of action heroes. I mean, John Wick is very beat upable. He loses a lot and that isn't, it's the opposite of what we were getting back in the 80s with what this film was commenting on. So
Yeah, like who was it? It was Unloved Universal Soldier. Who it was? It's Scott Tafoya. I'm saying that name wrong. I'm sorry. He does a video essay series called The Unloved. It's published on RogerEbert.com. He argues that Universal Soldier: Day of Reckoning is really the action movie for the generation of Gamergate because of the nihilism of it all. And like after this, like I'm like, yeah, you can't really do this again because it's just kind of like alt-right fuel. Like it feel like there's a certain kind of that like some not like I like ironic, but is it really ironic kind of nihilism to this movie that like I don't think when Himes made this movie he was like, yes, I shall this is a movie for the edgelords on the internet who go, we live in a society. But like because of like now we're watching it now in the year 2021, oh, it feels like we live in a society. And it's just like, oh yeah. I had a question though. How did you feel about the kind of Bride of Frankenstein aspects to the lobotomy scene where they drill his skull open and then he loses himself? But like I was wondering if you caught up on the kind of Bride of Frankenstein queerness of it all.
Oh, absolutely. I think that there are very few films like this that I can read as being straight. I mean that's just that's just a sheer fact. I think that there's just a lot to be said about maybe like the circle, right? Like the circle of presentation of gender presentation of sexual orientation where it's like it once you become too masculine you've cycled back into this consumption of male bodies as items that are desirable, right? You've set for yourself this goal, um which I think is it's kind of always inherent in these action films. Like they're designed for male audiences, so the male audience is meant to look at Arnold Schwarzenegger's oiled up body and want that for themselves. So I think that there's always something inherent there. When it comes to specifically the lobotomy scene or whatever, it's not really like a lobotomy. I don't know what they're doing. It looked fantastic though. That was a really well done special effects work there. I was impressed. And yeah, I was getting a lot of those same like Bride of Frankenstein vibes where it's like we need to essentially like gosh,
I
it's
think they say
so
we
weird.
can reproduce. It's like it reproduce like you called it out when you're talking about Bride of Frankenstein for censorship class, like something specifically about like they didn't want them to say like reproduce or something.
Yeah, it's like this idea where he's like using John's body to create more, right? He's using John's body to procreate. Like he wants to make more clones. That's the whole like gist essentially of like the film is that John is this one that we need to copy, and that needs to be the one that becomes the model for the rest of the clones, right? And so it's you have essentially like this really messed up subtextual, really messy like male sex scene going on here essentially, right? Because you have reproduction, like you're engaging and you're penetrating this masculine body with the goal of reproduction, um which is oof. There's a lot going on there, but yeah, it's like I think that any time that you're going to use a character's body as a vessel for reproduction, right? That's going to be a thing, right? Yeah. Because I mean, John isn't allowed, right? He's not allowed to reproduce with women. We established that in the opening scenes, right? Where he has this image of wife and child, but he's not allowed to keep that, right? He's not allowed to keep this image of heteronormativity, this goal of wife and child. That's not allowed. He's only allowed to be around other men, and interfere with other men's bodies. So
Like I'm not going to say this movie treats women well because it doesn't. Like they get blown apart and brutally murdered in their places of work and are treated as like visual spectacle for both erotic and like creepy erotic pleasure because of the gore. But like the character of Sarah is this she's the only woman in this movie who's allowed to really talk. And they're like at first it looks like they're going to be on that really rote compulsory heterosexual relationship of like, oh, we're on the run together and we're going to find love. And in the end, he discovers, oh, she wasn't really in love with me. She was in love with the guy who looked like me that I just murdered. And he just gives her the car and goes, "You're free now, just go." And like after that, he's just surrounded by men, and it to me, it's just kind of really the thing about like Ita- fascist films in Italy, like specifically the Empire colonial feature films. They're all these homonormative, homosocial spaces where like it's all about the denial and rejection of women, even though like once like it there's a whole bunch. Like go read my reading list if you really want to dig into this in a deep, thoughtful way from academics who this is their life, and I just read it. But it to me, like her character was this kind of smart subtext of like smart subversion of like the trope where like she isn't like she's not even really that big of a character, honestly. She just kind of stands there and stares like what did I get myself into? But like that like lack of connection really between her as the nominal female lead because she's the one with the most screen time is, I don't know, that's kind of interesting and feeds into the queerness of everything.
I'm glad that you mentioned the Italian fascist films as well, because I was thinking a lot of Pier Paolo Pasolini's Salo a lot, Salo or the 120 Days of Sodom, which also is very notably hyper violent and treats women very badly, as is just the genre of extreme cinema in general. And I would kind of consider this to be I would consider Universal Soldier Day of Reckoning to be a piece that is very much aligned with extreme cinema, even though the moniker is most commonly applied to films of like the staunch horror genre. We don't usually include action films for some reason as a part of it, which I think is a mistake. But yeah, there's like scenes in Salo where men will abuse women in the presence of other men sexually, right? Um, and it ends up like essentially like women as masturbation devices to further male sexuality, right? And I think that that's kind of what we're getting in Universal Soldier, but like to a lesser extent, right? So she's not here for the purposes of John's character, right? She's pretty, she's masturbatory for the sake of the audience that like wants a beautiful female character to look at, but like she's just kind of here so that like John can like essentially like morally jerk himself off and look like a good character, right? He like protected the woman and then continued to go on and further his like experiences with men, right? So it's kind of, yeah, it's it's very interesting. It's very interesting. And I don't want to condemn like Universal Soldier Day of Reckoning for this specifically, and I don't want to condemn like the extreme cinema genre for it either, because this is very common. Like this is my cat's knocking stuff over. Hold on.
Your cat says fuck the patriarchy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because like that's the thing, is that this is a standard device, right? You don't have, I mean if we wanted to do I don't know, like a James Bond film, for instance, right? We have Casino Royale. Eva Green's character, right, is for the same purposes, right? I think colloquially we call this fridging, where you just fridge the female character for the sake of furthering man pain. And it's always masturbatory. So it's yeah. It's like this is a acted out symptom of a larger problem. So
When they did that in Deadpool 2, it took me out of the movie. Like legitimately. I was like, no, the first film did such a good job building that relationship. Which like I'm talking about that as a Deadpool movie, but like then they fridge her and you're just like, I'm just like, this is a bunch of bullshit. And like in this one, at least she doesn't get to die. At least she gets
yeah.
to drive away off screen, never to be seen of again. Like she doesn't like, I don't even think we see her drive away.
Which I mean, like that's the best possible fate, right? I mean, considering like the context of the film, to have a character just disappear and not, violently die on the screen one way or another, that is the best possible outcome. Because like, I mean, she escaped, right? She got out. And that's, never going to be an option for, any of the other characters that you see on screen. Everyone that is shown and introduced comes back later and dies or is killed. So I guess on one hand, they've like afforded her a mercy that isn't afforded to any other character in the movie, but at the same time, yeah, it's done this thing. But I mean, I can't say that she was a well-written character or a fully formed character as opposed to Vanessa, right? Vanessa from Deadpool. I think that Deadpool's instance of fridging is probably more more of a personally heinous act than the fridging in Universal Soldier, just because we know Vanessa as a character and we know Vanessa very well, and we like her. Like, this is something like the audience like very much likes Vanessa. She's never viewed as like this adversarial object, which is also like super common in films of this caliber and this nature, action films in particular, right? You have the wife that isn't supportive of the husband and his masculine actions, or is viewed as some type of just like adversary that like they have to overcome the impositional nature of their wife. And in Deadpool we don't get that. The Skylar problem, exactly just like Skylar from Breaking Bad. And yeah, like we don't get that in Deadpool. Like, she's never that force. And so like when they fridge her, it is like it seems like particularly heinous, as opposed to Universal Soldier, where we don't know her, we don't care about her, the story's not about her, she's not involved in this, and she can just go, and it's less of an issue.
The fridging isn't even real, it turns out. We all just think it's real, except for all the other women that are murdered in this movie. The wife, though, the wife never even existed. So
Exactly. It's like it's better to have never existed in this film than it is to exist as a woman, but that tends to be the case regardless. So it's interesting.
yeah, like, this movie shouldn't have been as good or interesting as it turned out to be. Like, you can just poke at it, and that's that's what I like about most like movies like this. It's like, oh, you find it's like, oh, I can just poke at this with a lot of different things, and also like, man, it's 114 minutes. It's like it's hard to watch during the strobe lights, but like otherwise, it's fun to watch. You feel terrible, but it's fun.
Yeah, and it's a beefy runtime. I was expecting it to be about 20 minutes less than what it was. I was thinking more around like an hour and 10, hour 15, hour 20-minute runtime. And it fills that time, and it doesn't feel like it's very long. I think that's um like I think that speaks to just kind of like the expertise of the editing and the cinematography and the pacing just in general, because like you absolutely like if you've ever sat through a bad action film that like runs forever, like when the film is like feeling bad and lagging, and like you feel every minute of that runtime when it's not done well. And I think that this is done very well. I had no idea that it was 114 minutes until I had like looked at the timestamp thing at the bottom of my screen that I was watching it on, and then even then I was like, oh, I've already watched like 45 minutes of this. I never would have guessed. But it's fun, it's fast, it's violent. At no point was I like particularly like, this movie is so offensive I have to put it down and stop. I was never so deeply disturbed by the content that I had to rethink my life on an existential level, which I think is good. I don't want to have to do that. I have had to do that with some films, and this is not one of them. So I think that it is I'd say very watchable. I think that it's definitely, yeah, it's definitely a product of its time. I think that um I want to pick a film from like 2011, 2012 that I was like, this is really violent, I would like to watch this again, it would probably be Universal Soldier Day Reckoning, and not say The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. like in terms of like like very cinematic looking violent films, right? Because this is actually enjoyable. Like, I mean, I enjoy for different reasons. I enjoy for different reasons, right? Because this has like basically no plot, no intensive plot, and then Girl with Giant Tattoo is very intensive storytelling. But it feels more torturous at times than this does. So yeah, I enjoyed it. I think it's good.
Thank you for coming on with me for this episode.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That's it for our show this week. Thank you for listening and for your support. Please subscribe to the show on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow us on Instagram at Cineposium and on Twitter at Cposium to keep up with our updates and to keep in communication with us. Until next week, take care, everyone.